In 2020, researchers in Jerusalem discovered a cache of shark teeth at an archaeological dig that had been dated to about 2,800 years ago. At first, it was thought that these teeth had been cast aside at a market, but isotope analysis determined that the teeth were millions of years older than that. The likely explanation is that the teeth had been brought to Jerusalem from the Negev desert, where such teeth are found, and had been sold either as valuable items or as part of a collection. Indeed, fossils have been found in a variety of prehistoric sites, including a necklace with a 400-million-year-old trilobite fossil found at a Paleolithic site in France. And while these collections are by no stretch of the imagination museums, they do suggest, as archaeologist Dr. Peter Leeming says, that discovery and collection is as old as us and our hominid relations. And how this interest in the unique evolved into our modern system of museums and enormous historical, natural, and other collections is history that deserves to be remembered.
The Paleontological Research Institution, located in Ithaca, New York, is home to one of the largest fossil collections in North America, as well as the publisher of the Bulletins of American Paleontology, the oldest paleontological journal in the Western Hemisphere. Founded in 1932, the museum is celebrating its 90th anniversary this year and inspired us to look at an interesting forgotten history, that of the preservation of history itself. It's clear from archaeological evidence that humans and even our near ancestors have always collected fossils and other natural phenomena, even if they had no idea what they were. The Hopewell culture in North America turned fossilized shark teeth into jewelry, and an early human grave in England had hundreds of fossilized urchins around them. Humans have also been interested in other kinds of artifacts as well. One of the earliest known public museums was opened around 530 BC by a princess of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Her museum exhibited artifacts of earlier Mesopotamian civilizations. For most of human history, collections of natural phenomena and cultural artifacts was generally a private enterprise. The word museum is a Latin derivation of the Greek museon, which means seat of the muses. And rather than denoting a place where artifacts or specimens were preserved, studied, and interpreted, it referred more to a philosophical institution. Ptolemy formed a great museum at Alexandria, which included the great library, but it was solely a place of intellectual study, and there were no exhibited collections. Collections before the modern era were largely in the hands of the wealthy, and there was no standardization in how to interpret or catalog the items. While some would make discoveries and inferences based on what they had collected, none of their collections was publicly available or widely accessible. The term museum came back into use during the Renaissance, first to describe the large collection of art and other artifacts held by Lorenzo de' Medici and his descendants, although it's not collected in a single building. Personal collections of curiosities, including archaeological finds, fossils, paintings, plant specimens, and more, became a symbol of wealth and power, and among the wealthy the collections bloomed. They began to be gathered in a particular room called a cabinet, not a piece of furniture but a private space, usually for men, that served as a retreat, often for reading. This led to the creation of cabinets of curiosities, also called Wunderkammer or wonder rooms. These rooms, of course, were meant to showcase the wealth and the status of the owner. Historian R.J.W. Evans explains that there were two main types of cabinets: the princely cabinet, serving a largely representational function, and the more modest collection of the humanist scholar or virtuoso, which served more practical and scientific purposes. They also served as entertainment for visitors. While they often contained brief descriptions, their purpose was not generally to educate. They were only open to the wealthy and the whims of the owner. Early meetings of the Royal Society were meetings more for entertainment than enlightenment, and were open to fellows to display their findings based on these collections. Cabinets of curiosities date at least to 1335, when one is mentioned in Treviso, Italy. The earliest example we have of such a room comes from a 1599 engraving in a book by Ferrante Imperato, who illustrated the book with images of his huge collection displayed at a palace in Naples. Imperato was among the first to correctly identify processes which formed fossils, illustrating the connection between these early collections and scientific discovery. These rooms were often filled to the brim with all manner of curiosities like fossils, interesting minerals, taxidermied animals, interesting artifacts, books, including pressed specimens of plants, paintings, and more. In 1587, a collector claimed that there were three types of things necessary to make a good cabinet: sculptures, curious items from home or abroad, and antlers, horns, claws, feathers, and other things belonging to strange or curious animals. The collection of Danish physician Ole Worm was even referred to as a museum. These collections were not necessarily scientific and often included technological wonders like clockworks and entirely fictional things like taxidermied chimera and cockatrices. Worm's collection included a Scythian lamb, a mythical plant thought to grow sheep like fruit. Narwhal tusks displayed as unicorn horns were a common display. These collections were especially valuable if they collected oddities and rarities like taxidermied calves or strange gems. By the 18th century, these collections began to wane in popularity among the wealthy as science came to understand nature better. The importance of the cabinets, however, extended beyond that. These collections became the basis of numerous museums, such as the Amberbach cabinet, originally the collection of two law professors in Basel, Switzerland, which opened to the public in 1671. The Ashmolean Museum, Britain's first public museum, opened in 1683. The Ashmolean Museum was based on the cabinet of curiosities donated to the University of Oxford by Elias Ashmore. Many other museums were established with these collections, like the British Museum, founded in 1753, the Taylor's Museum, founded in 1778 in the Netherlands, and Kunstkamera, the first museum established in Russia in 1714. Early museums also included the Capitoline Museums, the oldest collection of art in the world, begun in 1471 when Pope Sixtus VI donated numerous ancient sculptures to the people of Rome. The shift from private collections to largely public institutions holding these kinds of artifacts and specimens was dramatic and to a large extent took place in the 19th century. The end of the 18th century saw the growth of a middle class, allowing a larger public to both obtain education and seek out the curious and scientific. Early museums still often limited visitors, were still considered either private collections or the collections of societies. Most of these museums still had a vision of serving the experts rather than educating a lay public. Even when the British Museum opened to the public, visitors were required to apply in writing for admission, and only small groups were allowed inside for fear that crowds would damage the artifacts. In 1793, the Louvre was officially opened during the French Revolution, made up largely of pieces from the royal collection. While the idea was to make the collection available to the public, it too was limited. Under the 10-day weeks instituted during the Revolution, the public only had access 3 days per decade, while 6 were for foreigners and artists. Napoleon grew the collection through looting and conquest, but most important was the concept that the Louvre was a symbol of national prestige and a sign of popular sovereignty. In 1846, the U.S. would open their own national museum, the Smithsonian, originally organized as the United States National Museum. By the middle 19th century, museums were often open to the public, though they were not always especially scientific. The Panopticon, Great Globe, the Colosseum, and Royal Polytechnic Institution were all scientific or art exhibitions in London, but all were considered entertainment, on par with a theater. This also explains P.T. Barnum's Grand Scientific and Musical Theater, as well as his American Museum, neither of which were scientific institutions, but largely entertainment ones, and ones that encouraged viewers to speculate on the oddities. They profited off the growing interest in legitimate science and inquiry, effectively helping to expand an audience interested in the scientific, if not always accurately. Public interest is also exemplified in the selling of curios on the Jurassic Coast in England, where Mary Anning and others sold invertebrate fossils like ammonite shells. Again, the connection between collecting and legitimate science appears where she contributed materially to early paleontology with fossils of Ichthyosaurus and the plesiosaur. Hadrosaurus folci was discovered in 1868 in New Jersey. Joseph Leidy identified and named it, and it was mounted at the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences. Hadrosaurus was the first dinosaur ever mounted for the public, and it was enormously popular. The Academy usually saw around 30,000 visitors. In the first year after Hadrosaurus was mounted, the number more than doubled, and the year after that, 100,000 people visited the Academy, eventually literally forcing the Academy to build a new building. The Age of Enlightenment also helped direct the future of museums, with the 19th century seeing the development of museums as a way to civilize the general public. The value of museums and exhibitions of museum material as a form of national pride were recognized as well, which was a driving force behind World's Fairs, which is where Chinese, Japanese, and other Eastern nations were first introduced to the Western concept of a museum. Professionalization in the field was slow, as museums were generally run by people who had expertise in particular fields, such as natural historian Louis Agassiz, who founded Harvard's Museum of Comparative Zoology, or English paleontologist Richard Owen. The Museums Association was established in London in 1889, and it published the Museums Journal, the first publication that focused primarily on the theory and organization of museums. Similar groups formed in Germany in 1905 and in America in 1919. These associations developed ideas of how museums should be organized, what their goals should be, and what should be displayed, and why. Space for specimen collections has always been an issue. Museums quickly amassed enormous collections, most of which could not possibly be displayed simultaneously. The Hunterian Museum, a surgical museum based around surgeon anatomist John Hunter's collection of medical material, hardly found a home in a newly built building in 1813 before the collection swelled, thanks to the Royal College of Surgeons' request for more specimens. By 1831, the articles were heaped one upon another, and additions were continually built throughout the 19th century. Systems of how to guide visitors through the collection to tell particular stories and theory about lighting and just how much information to display along with the exhibits all began to be the focus of conversations surrounding museums. Initially, large portions, if not all of the collection, would be on display. In addition to the front-facing public exhibitions, however, museums also serve as vital storage facilities for scientific material. Along with education, most museums today are available to experts and researchers who want to examine specimens and artifacts for their study, and museums represent the best way to maintain and organize such material and conserve it for the future. Until the 19th century, much of the material in a museum was privately owned and accessible only via connections to the owners, but public and national museums could serve as institutions dedicated to national research. Workrooms for the safe examination of parts of the collection developed alongside the development of modern exhibit curation. All of this developed while managing the enormous collections and continuing to display parts of the collection for the public. The late 19th century has been called the Museum Age, thanks to the rapid building and development of museums as centers of research and the public's relationship with the scientific. Even while much research is still done at universities in the United States, access to collections of museums is vital. The collections are able to maintain information about individual specimens, which can then be studied across time as new methods are developed, and more information can be found from specimens that have been studied for the last century or more.
Further issues and concepts have continued to alter how museums display and talk about their collections, with recent changes at many museums focusing on unearthing forgotten narratives and the voices of minorities in history that have been traditionally overlooked.
Technology has also changed exhibits, and in many museums, fewer objects are actually displayed. In 2010, historian Stephen Kahn argued that museums don't even need physical objects anymore. That isn't to say that museums are becoming less important, but that how they talk about and disseminate information continues to change. Technology has also allowed people to virtually visit museums from their own homes.
What is clear is that museums remain a vital pillar of education, both for science and for history, and for the preservation and continued study of artifacts and specimens that will continue to inform and drive our understanding of the past, preserving history that deserves to be remembered.
The Paleontological Research Museum in Ithaca, New York, was established in 1932 by geology professor Gilbert Harris. Today it houses over 7 million fossil specimens and has a number of facilities, including the Museum of the Earth and the Cayuga Nature Center, which aim to educate visitors about the Earth and its history, while also providing a state-of-the-art center for ongoing research and collections.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you have to do is subscribe.